Good morning, everyone. We are now recording. Thank you very much for joining us for this breakfast briefing. We're running a hybrid event today, so we are in person at the Repertory Theatre in Birmingham, which is a lovely, lovely venue to hold a breakfast. And we have got a good number of people in the room and a good number of people online. So it's lovely to see everybody. Thank you very much. So just a couple of housekeeping notes. As I said, we are recording this event, and the recording will be available after the event as well. For the people in the room, a little bit of housekeeping. So we're not expecting a fire alarm, but if there is a fire bell that sounds, then the exit is just to the left through the doors there. The breakfast and the bathrooms are just through the right-hand side there. But if you have any questions, if you can hold them to the end, that would be much appreciated. Thank you very much. Okay, now without further ado, I'm going to move to my colleague Jacqueline Cordell from the University of Nottingham, who's going to do an overview of an ESRC pilot programme. Jacqueline, over to you. Can I use these? Or is it this? Perfect, excellent. All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the event today. So, as Kate very kindly said, my name is Dr. Jacqueline Cordell, and I'm a research fellow at the University of Nottingham. So, I was sort of one of the leads on the Midlands ESRC KTP pilot project, which is a bit of a mouthful, but what it actually means is that various government funders, so Innovate UK and the ESRC, the Economic and Social Science Research Council, commissioned a project to look at why local businesses were engaging a lot with the local universities, sort of engineers and computer scientists and sort of expertise of that kind, but weren't seeing the same amount of engagement with sort of the other members of the university that specialize in other areas. So things that have to do with society or economics or things of that kind. So they wanted us to commission a report just to see what's going on and what can potentially be done to bring these two things together. So what we ended up doing, just as a quick overview, is this took place over the past year, and we had two phases. One was collecting some evidence on what's happening on the ground and why, and then looking at interventions on sort of how to bridge this gap that we talked about previously. So we went around and we talked to a bunch of different stakeholders that have been engaging with this government funding and KTP funding in the past, as well as people who have the potential to be able to do so in the future. So if you look over here, we talked to a bunch of academics, we talked to people who are practitioners in KTP already, and we talked to people who were representatives of local businesses. So just so I understand in the room, has anybody here been involved in KTP at all? No? So, okay. All right, good. And some of you online might have had the opportunity to as well. So that's what we've ended up doing for the past year. And we're now at the point where we're finally able to write up the report for our findings and to talk about next steps. So this is what's going to be talked about today. So when we were talking to all the various stakeholder groups, the one we're going to focus on today is our business organizations, our local businesses. And the findings that came out of our conversations with them was, broadly speaking, those who haven't yet been involved with some of these experts were interested in working with people who have expertise in social and economic aspects of intellectual knowledge, but what they weren't quite sure about were the mechanics of it. So what types of expertise would be useful to a business to solve certain business challenges? What would a collaboration look like if we're not necessarily involved in developing a product, but something else? So what types of significance would it have? So what types of return on investment could you get by pairing up with someone with this type of expertise? how to operationalize this knowledge, and then obviously sort of the mechanisms and funding on how to facilitate this knowledge transfer from the academics into the local businesses. So these are the types of things that we're going to talk about today. So starting off, first things first, when we talk about sort of this idea of social and economic knowledge, what we're fundamentally talking about is knowledge on how to understand people. So this is how people think, how they work, how they behave, how they communicate with each other, how they make decisions, and how all of those things play a role in how they interact with businesses, how they buy things, how they go about selecting services. If we're talking about sort of external stakeholders, sort of how if this organization is, for example, a charity, sort of how the people in the communities they serve behave and operate and what their priorities are, so it can inform what types of services they provide. So another thing here, and as well as sort of the external stakeholders, when we're talking about people, is also the internal. This is around sort of the business's employees, and sort of how knowledge of how people work with greatest efficiency and productivity, and greatest sense of inclusivity even, can help develop better workplaces, more efficient workplaces, and places where people want to stay in a long-term sense. So what this knowledge does is it allows local organizations to improve sort of the quality of the products and the services they already offer, or potentially sort of a window into being able to offer something new. So ultimately, this comes down to people, where any good business strategy, so as we well know, regardless of sort of what the business organization is doing and how it's being achieved and what their goals are, fundamentally, people and people strategy is a fundamental aspect of it. So when we talk about sort of collaborations with people who are experts in sort of people and how they operate, the most important thing of them is that it tends to be challenge driven. It comes from the business itself and saying there is something that we want to improve, fix, or change in the organization, and we need some expertise or sort of knowledge that we don't currently have but would benefit from. So the role of the expert in this particular sort of arrangement is to provide that knowledge, and not only provide that knowledge, but to consolidate it into something that's fundamentally tangible, and that can be disseminated through and translated into the organization through things like frameworks, models, toolkits. Apps are very popular as well, or even training packages to develop new skills that perhaps the workforce doesn't have at the moment. So the benefits of this collaboration with these experts is that they can provide sort of the most up-to-date knowledge within their fields, that cutting edge information they wouldn't have access to otherwise, and then the ability to translate or otherwise operationalize that into something that is usable in a business-oriented context. Okay, so in a sense, they're very much sort of the innovators of their field, and the thing that helps them sort of perpetuate their skills and knowledge is to be able to come into these businesses and do things like this. So we have a couple of examples. So if my colleague Philippa is going to sort of provide a little bit more detail and some more examples in the next talk. But just to get a sense of what these look like. So we talked earlier about taking this information and making it operationable within business context. We had an example not too long ago of an economist that came in and developed an in-house framework to look at social and environmental impact of a particular organization on a local region. So this was just sort of the idea where the knowledge wasn't there. They usually have to rely on consultancy. They brought in an expert, an economic expert, to embed that knowledge in-house. So same over here on the social expert side, we've got a couple of different models. The first one here is very much client facing, so customer facing. This one was the social expert came in and helped integrate models of psychological behavior in consumers, as well as persuasive communication strategies, blended them together to help them be able to provide better marketing and advertising services. Okay, this is core knowledge that was already embedded in the fields anyway, but hadn't yet been translated over into a business context. Now, if we wanted to switch that and look at the employees, this would be an example here was where they brought someone in, I think it was human factors, I believe, where they helped develop some training mechanisms and evaluation schemes to help train drivers deal with the fallout of accidents and incidents that occur on sort of when they're driving trains. In this case, this was developing a new skill set. So these train drivers had a lot of technical competence and the ability to sort of drive trains and stop and be able to signal and all these other things, but they didn't have any training on sort of mental well-being and how to handle stressful situations. So it filled a nice gap that existed in that particular workforce. So there's a range of different opportunities here, depending on the needs of the individual organization. The big thing here, obviously, is sort of what do I get out of it? And there's quite a couple different models on how this operates. For a lot of organizations, there's the benefit of profit generation, sort of we're offering something different, something new, either increasing the client base or getting, more business from existing clients. So this is not to say it's the only model. A lot of organizations don't operate on profits, on profit generation. So we can also have a return on investment from this knowledge through things like cost savings. A good example of this is the cost savings that come from developing a better, more inclusive work environment. If you make the employees happy, they're more likely to stay. If they're more likely to stay, you don't have to sort of, thank you. You don't have to pay the additional costs of having to advertise and rehire someone else, which is much more expensive than keeping someone in place. Okay, so there are a range of different ways to develop the economic return on this expertise. Another thing here is the social impacts or the social return on investment. And there's a whole range of different frameworks to capture this on a case-by-case basis, but it's essentially looking to quantify that social value of the intervention. So these are the things that aren't necessarily around to sort of pounds and pence. This is more about sort of the quality of what's being offered, improvement to the quality of services, improvement to the quality of work life, of well-being, of happiness. Okay. One really good thing that is useful about this social expertise is that it is very good at solving proactive problems as well as being reactive. So the majority of challenges that will come about, so a business will come to us and say, I had this problem, how can we fix it? Where's the expertise? And sort of how can we do this? Social expertise is really good in that it can foresee what could potentially be a problem, and you can proactively mitigate against it, even if it's not taking place at the moment. So another good thing about the sort of this social expertise is what we call the quote unquote ripple effect. So this means that sort of the positive outcomes and changes that take place through utilizing this expertise are not just localized to the business itself, but cascades throughout the local community as well. So the economic example we saw before, so it was very much a positive impact, social, environmental, sustainable impact on the local community. And this is the thing that people get really passionate about, okay? These are what the experts are really passionate about. They want to make a difference in the world. They want to contribute to the greater good. In addition, helping bolster business organizations and make them grow and more profitable and etc. So it all comes back to there's also strong business cases on a wider basis. So if the business organization becomes known for being a social innovator on the basis of inclusivity or EDI or mental well-being, it's going to attract in more business from people who are like-minded. It's also going to attract in more people, qualified people who want to work there. Same thing in some places, increasingly to be able to bid for government money, you have to be able to demonstrate as an organization that you are proactively addressing current social and economic issues. So this is a really good way of being able to demonstrate that as well. A couple quick misconceptions I want to clear up very quickly. So a lot of the time when people are faced with this idea of social expertise, you get the approach of sort of, oh, this is just sort of soft skills, or it's not really essential to the running of the organization. And this is a thing that has been debunked repeatedly over time, is that sort of what is sort of in this day and age where sort of government communications is all about sort of STEM and everything else, it's a very easy pattern to fall into and a very easy messaging. But if we're taking the approach of thinking about this in terms of people and how people underpin everything, then all of the things about how people communicate with each other and how they make decisions and how they work together in the workplace all gather cumulative effects that have very significant impacts on a wider basis. Once you get to that point and saying, okay, probably is the business critical to some extent, sometimes you run into the problem where some solutions are seen to be achievable in-house without external support, and some are. So in many cases, there are, particularly for large organizations, there are in-house teams that are able to tackle these things with enough support and information at disposal. Some of them aren't, and that's where sort of we come in. The benefits of having that sort of external knowledge and everything else is that sort of whatever is being brought into the company, the frameworks, the toolkits, they tend to be cutting edge information, so things that have been developed within the past 5 years. Which isn't something you can always get from an existing standing workforce. And then finally, there's this potential misunderstanding that the opportunities that are in place here, so the government funding, K2V, everything else, is limited to business organizations. Now, this is part and parcel due to sort of the communications that are coming out of this. They talk a lot about businesses and business organizations and companies. But in reality, sort of the reason why this project exists and in many ways is driving what's changing at the moment, these government funders are very interested in sort of in these range of organizations. They're interested in heritage, they're interested in charities, they're interested in social enterprises and SMEs, and even some micro-organizations as well. So all of these range definitely fit in here. So one of the things to take away, if nothing else, is that if you are a member of one of these organizations, please don't be put off if you see business, because it's a range of organizations. And in many ways, these smaller sort of charities and social enterprises are already aligned with a lot of the social skills and expertise that are already on offer. Just to quickly show here, so these social experts and where to find them. They can be in a range of different places and under some very confusing names. The key thing to take away from this is that you don't have to worry about finding them or trying to unpick what area of specialty is going to solve your particular organizational challenge. So universities are sort of come equipped these days with experts, the practitioners who are able to make this translation for you. So if you're bringing the problem to them, they can say right away, okay, this sounds like you need this type of expertise in this particular type of subject area. Some of them are fairly straightforward. If we're talking about communication, it's probably going to be somewhere in linguistics. If we're talking about consumer behavior, it's probably going to be something around human factors or behavioral psychology. Okay, but the point of the matter is, so they already exist to take care of it for you. But there's a range of expertise on offer. The key thing here is that we're at a flashpoint in many ways of organizational development opportunity when it comes to this social and economic expertise. This is going to particularly lend itself to the post-COVID work environment in sort of as organizations are currently sort of dealing with and will continue to deal with existing challenges around how the workplace changes, how the composition of the workforce changes, and the working patterns as we go to flexible working, remote working, hybrid working, and all of the combinations thereof. Increasing importance is being dedicated to things like physical health and the sort of organizational impact of sick leave and how to mitigate that as best as possible. Part and parcel with that is that rising awareness of mental health and well-being and how important that is to take into account. Again, as a proactive measure of if we take care of them now, how is that going to pan out moving forwards? And of course, sort of the continuing things around sort of the operations and management as we move into these new work patterns and how to most effectively manage our workforces and how to encourage the greatest amount of productivity. So this falls into a larger type of opportunity that's not only around increasing sort of the quality of work life within an existing workforce, but how to bring in the right people as well. The big thing at the moment is about sort of recruiting diverse workforces to reflect a wide range of shared experiences to better serve a wider range of clients. So a lot of organizations are struggling with that right now, and that's something that's right up our alley. And the final thing that could potentially be a hot topic in the near future is this idea around sustainability in all of its various facets. So I'm going to wrap that up here and just leave you with a couple of reflection points as we take it into the next presentation, where we talk about sort of the mechanics of what funding is available and how to apply for it. But the key things for us to think about as we move forwards are the challenges that my organization faces or has the potential to face in the next couple of years, whether it falls into any of the categories that we've talked about so far, or whether something completely different. And then sort of how a deeper understanding of how people fundamentally operate and people's strategy could help you as an organization either be more efficient at doing what you do, or sort of perhaps better serving various target demographics. And then if at all applicable, what would the organization need to help solve these challenges? I think that's it for me.
That's lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jacqueline. There was a very polite ripple of applause here. And now I'm going to hand you over to Philippa, who's a very knowledgeable knowledge transfer network advisor, and she's going to be running through KTPs in a little bit more detail. And just bear in mind some of those questions that Jacqueline was asking.
Okay, thank you very much, Kate. And hi, everybody. I'm just going to pop a glass of water down there. So KTP has been mentioned quite a few times. Yet another acronym, stands for Knowledge Transfer Partnerships. And just to explain, so I'm here to explain the mechanics of how that could be a way to get funding to help undertake the kinds of projects that Jacqueline's just been outlining. So Knowledge Transfer Partnerships is a business support scheme that the UK government has been funding for 47 years, would you believe? It was originally called the Teaching Company Scheme and had a model around replicating what teaching hospitals were doing with universities right back in the 70s. And they recognized that there was a need to do something like that with industry as well. So at the time, it was very much focusing on engineering industry. So, but the scheme it's changed its name, but it still does exactly what it says on the tin. The whole idea is that we want to help businesses build partnerships with universities to transfer knowledge into the businesses, embed it, and help them to grow and innovate into the future. So if I just go through this in a very sort of straightforward way, picking up a little bit, hopefully, I'm an engineer, so this has been a learning curve for me too. I'm one of about 33 of the advisors that we have on a regional basis around the UK. We all work with our local universities and local businesses. I'm a bit of an interloper. I come from the East Midlands as opposed to the West Midlands, but I've come here today because I've been working with Jacqueline on some of this economic and social science research council work to try and understand better how we as advisors can also help you guys understand where social sciences could be of benefit, even in a technology-based business. So learning curve for me too. There are local advisors to the West Midlands. If something here stimulates your interest in knowledge transfer partnerships as a process, a grant application you'd like to work on, you'd like to make contacts into local universities in the West Midlands, please contact Kate afterwards, because she will be the person that will know the local advisors, and they'll pick up from whatever I say today and help you with that process. Our role is to help right at the beginning to identify whether or not an application is viable for the grant. Because of that, we actually approve around about 85% of the applications that go in. So we help to filter. So if you're going to put effort into putting together a grant application, we are pretty confident we're going to get it. So compared to other forms of funding, I think that's quite an advantage. But the basis of this from the government's perspective is that the UK is extremely good at in the research. In the research that we undertake in this country, it is second to none in many areas. But what we're not so good at is translating that into use in the business community, in the world at large. And this process, the knowledge transfer partnerships process, is exactly in place to help make that happen. So we want to draw on the expertise we have in our universities, whatever the subject area, whatever the need is of the business. So it's totally responsive to the business need. So it's not about them pushing their knowledge, it's about you drawing on it. So what does that mean? We set up a project. A project is set up as a partnership between you as a business, whatever kind of organization you are, and the chosen university that you've made a connection with. You've identified some gaps in your expertise and capabilities, just as Jacqueline's pointed out. That could be technical, but it could also be some of the areas of social science that could be of benefit to your business. You might not know how to articulate it, but if we can put you in touch with the right experts in the universities, they will help you to work out what your need actually is. You can articulate it in a grant application, working with them, and then working with them once the project is set up so that they can bring their know-how, apply it to your business. Sometimes that may be for the first time for them as well. So there's a learning opportunity for them too. But we want our experts in academia to understand businesses better, to understand how their knowledge has application. So there's a win-win out of that. Once you have that grant application approved, then you appoint somebody to come in and act as a project manager. And we call them the KTP associate. So we have thousands of alumni and KTP associates now. Some of them have gone up to very senior roles in organizations. They often come back in their later life and say, the business I'm working in now, I really enjoy the KTP experience. I can see that the business I'm in now could really benefit from it. So, we've got a fantastic network there. But they will actually be the full-time sort of resource that's going to work on this project. But they'll work with somebody inside the business, so they're based in the business but employed by the university, just because that makes life a lot easier, and it gives them access back to the expertise and the facilities in the university. So it's a win-win-win in actual fact. It's a three-way collaboration. I like to use the proverb on the left-hand side, the whole thing about what a KTP does. The legacy is always that we've embedded that capability, that you can do things at the end of a project that you couldn't do at the beginning. So it's a teaching someone how to fish kind of analogy that we want to build on. That three-way partnership provides the expertise, provides the grant funding to support the costs, and that full-time resource that's going to bring in some kind of transformational change for you. And to give you an idea of the scale, we've been putting around about 33 million pounds a year as grant funding into projects, around about 800 projects. we are expecting that to go up next year. So, we're looking for new projects, new ideas. So if anything comes from this, that puts a germ of an idea into your mind, we take applications 5-6 times a year. It varies a little bit year on year, but it doesn't go away. We've been around 47 years. Even if it's next year or the year after, you think that this might be relevant to you, please come and find us, because we'd be more than happy to talk to you about doing a KTP project. So we start from the premise of a business that has ambitions to grow. And just as Jacqueline mentioned, when we use the word business or company, not-for-profit organisations, third sector organisations are just as eligible. And we will go down to micro-sized companies with a little caution, because this isn't the cheapest route, even though you're getting a decent grant to support the costs. The costs are still substantial for the business. So it's not for the faint-hearted, and I will explain that in a moment. But when you're very, very small, you have to keep your business going. We have to consider from on your behalf whether or not the cost and the time is just a little too much for you to cope with. Maybe there are other funding mechanisms, and very often people like Kate will have access to other forms of funding locally that can help you with that initial work, so that you get to that critical mass that then means a KTP, which is a much bigger project, is feasible. So, and as I said, you have that ambition to grow. You don't quite know how you're going to do it, and maybe you don't know how to articulate the expertise. So we find that university expertise for you. If you have links already, that's great. It's always easier to work with a local university, but you can work with universities anywhere if they have some specific expertise you want to access. There's just extra cost involved, so we just have to be a little careful there. But they have the expertise that can be adapted, that can be applied uniquely in your business, and that gives you a USP. So we're very conscious that this needs to be a good business plan, that it's a viable idea that you have. Come together, write the application, submit for the grant, and once the grant's awarded, the university will then go out and recruit the associate with you as an organisation. You do this jointly, but they are employing them. So we go through a recruitment process. It's critical to choose the right person. We've learned, the hard way that sometimes if you haven't quite got the right person, it doesn't quite work. That's okay. We can look at ways and means of, using probation to help us to perhaps, let someone go if they're not quite going to be able to deliver the project, and we can recruit again. But there's lots of effort goes into that selection process, and of course you've got all the resources of the university to help you do that. So it de-risks that recruitment process for you. But they need to be somebody who may not have all of the expertise, because the whole reason for doing a KTP is that one person does have all the expertise. You can't easily go out into the marketplace and recruit. We need to kind of establish that that's part of the issue. But they need to come and have that desire to learn and grow and to do innovative things, exciting things. It can be a real adventure, a KTP project. So they're the kinds of people we want, people who are going to be future leaders. And hopefully they will stay. And a good proportion of them are offered jobs in the businesses at the end, and they do stay. So, that's another way that we can actually help you to grow your skill set too. They can be about anything. We are completely agnostic to the subject area. I tend to put introducing new technologies at the top because the majority of our projects are about technology. But I think we have to understand that bringing new technology into your organization or using it in your products, your services, is also a cultural change for a lot of people. So a lot of this whole digital revolution is changing a lot of people's roles and responsibilities, ways of communicating, ways of managing themselves. So we've had a push on doing management KTPs where that's been a big focus, where it has been about people, how they work, how they link together, how they engage with the clients. Some really quite different thinking is coming through on that. So this introduction of new expertise, developing deeper understanding, we're quite happy for there to be, if you like, the academic rigor applied to investigating things, researching things, and then deciding what you want to implement. But implementation is the key. We want to see something actually introduced and changed. And perhaps methodologies for evaluating that is another thing that you might need to learn. You haven't ever done that before. The developing new products, processes and services, again, as Jacqueline said, social science expertise can be critical to working out what a product should look like, feel like, how is it used, who's going to use it, the processes you're using to produce them, and the services that perhaps you're offering. So we can really see how that behavioral side of things, the human factors, are absolutely critical to getting that right. I think we've always known that, but what we have now are more academics who've researched that kind of thing, who have fresh ideas on how to do it. And that's the point. You're reaching in for those fresh ideas. Optimizing business processes, well, efficiencies, perhaps that's more for the larger organizations where they've done things the same old way for a while. And when I say larger, I'm still, perhaps including the SME categories, but the slightly larger SMEs. But it's sometimes this is about really sort of cutting out the waste, because waste is also time, which costs money. It's about communicating more effectively. It's about organizing things more effectively. And even the marketing process, the supply chain processes, all those relationships, stakeholder relationships are huge at the moment. And that also has human factors. And entering new markets, well, again, depending on what it is you do or what kind of markets we're talking about, you may need to do some really, deep work to understand those markets. It may be you're going international. So there's a lot to learn about the cultural side of marketing on an international basis. So that I think you can see there endless possibilities. It just depends exactly what it is your business needs. What's that blockage? How can we bring some expertise in to help with that? If societal impacts are important within that, and I think in many cases we would say that even the technology-based projects ought to have had more of social science aspects built into the work program. And net zero, I think, as Jacqueline picked up, sustainability and the whole push towards net zero. Lots of companies don't really understand what their current situation is, how to measure it, how to change it, how to improve it. And some of that also is cultural. So if we look at what it might deliver to the business, these are just suggestions, and it's the same as Jacqueline's put up. Really, it's that whole range of things. It depends what it is that you feel you need. Where are the blockages? Where is that lack of understanding? Very often in our projects, it's the senior management teams that actually put their hands up and say, we need to learn how to do things different. In some cases, they feel it's more the rest of the organization that needs to be organized differently. I think very often we get to the end of a project and the senior management team recognize that they did have to go through some kind of change of thinking, change in their skill sets. So, this is also a means of going through that sometimes quite painful change in people's minds. Sometimes when companies were set up based on a technology, we have to shift things. We have to shift the thinking and ways of doing business. Different business models, different ways of setting up contracts, all of those things. Servitization, all of those things are making a big difference. So, looking at company attitudes, culture, outlook, giving people the confidence to innovate, understanding how to encourage it, how to measure it, how to make sure it happens, giving people the chance to grow and do things that a lot of people have ideas in businesses and never get heard. So how can we actually open those kinds of channels of communication? So again, I think supporting, what's come out of the research that Jacqueline's done. These are slides I would have used anyway. It's great that it all fits together. We need to understand that the universities are going to gain from this too. Now they're going to be paid to provide these services, so they gain some income. The whole project value that you work out using our sort of budget process, they can count as research income, so they quite like that. So that's a big tick in their box. But they also want to learn personally. If they have developed some tools and techniques, some toolkits, it's great for them to actually apply them in practice, make sure they work, evaluate them, and even those methodologies are useful to you as a business afterwards. And it feeds back into their teaching. It gives the opportunity to publish, which is a big tick in a box for them. Great PR for you as well. If there are papers being presented at academic conferences with your company name on, that's opening up, your profile a lot as well. So, there are wins there about broadening and deepening your relationship with that university. Recruitment is a big issue for a lot of people at the moment. So if you've got good relationships into a university, you can start to look at things like student projects, placements, internships, things that are like separate to the KTP but could be complementary. And that relationship can carry on well beyond the KTP. So for us, this is a great way to build those relationships. And then the KTP associate. Well, these are going to be people who, they could be people at any time of life and from any walk of life. They are just people who have the requisite expertise that you've put in your advert. They will need to have some kind of qualification that is appropriate, but they could also have a lot of experience that's appropriate. They can be any age. We don't discriminate in that sense. And I think the average age is now sort of 30 plus. And I have the odd one up in their 50s because they've changed direction. They've gone back and done, refreshed their learning, and they've spotted the opportunity. And it appeals because it's an adventure. It's exciting. There's some innovation needed. You've got to be proactive. You've got to get out there and talk to people and get involved and make a difference. so it's not for the faint-hearted in that respect either, but the growth that we observe in associates when they go through this process is amazing. They come out of it with so much more confidence at the end of it. And if you want to recruit them, they can often come straight into a manager's role in your business because we've trained them for that. We've prepared them for it. We invest within the project. We sort of set aside 10% of their time. So they're going to have a work program set up for a specific length of time, which is what the grant funds. And we set aside some time to give them space to learn. So it's not that they go away on training courses for 10% of their time. It's that with it built within the activities and with some cash associated with that as well, so that if there is some training required, attendance at conferences, memberships of professional bodies, that kind of thing, it's all supported as part of what we do. Eligibility. So these slides are hopefully going to be useful for you to have afterwards for reference. So I've sort of included all the stuff here. Charities and not-for-profits are built in here and highlighted because we've just had a change of the grant rate. What I haven't spoken about this yet, but for large businesses, the grant rate is 50%. For smaller businesses, the SME definition up to 250 people is 67%, the grant rate. For third sector organisations, the charities and not-for-profits, we've just introduced a 75% grant rate because we want to encourage a lot more of their involvement, not just for their own purposes, but because of the broader impacts that can have. So it's any business-based organisation, but they do have to have that critical mass, that size in terms of some cash in the bank and enough people to absorb this expertise and take it forward. We have in the past funded public sector organisations. We can't at the moment, but public sector organisations can sometimes be involved in a project in the background, so they could be a key client. So if they want some kind of innovation developing and you're a partner with them, then maybe persuade them that they support you in doing a KTP, so that you can develop that for them and they're the kind of the key client that benefits in the first instance. So some of the detail, the project timeframes can be anything from 12 to 36 months. The average at the moment is around 24 months. That's kind of affordable. It's a sensible time to do some investigation, to come up with the right solutions, to implement them, to evaluate whether they've worked. Okay, oh no, I've got to hurry up, sorry. What you're paying for here is that full-time associate, some allowances for training and development, but also for travel and for small scale consumables like their computer and things like that. They get half a day a week of the academic expert built into the project. So if you compared this with consultancy, it's a heck of a lot more value for money in a sense, because you're getting that embedding, you own the expertise, the knowledge. You also get access to the university through the additional university support, and they provide all the admin support as well. So because the university is the grant recipient, if your project is considered to be R&D by the taxman, your contribution to the project, because you'll just be invoiced for your contribution to the university's costs, would be eligible for R&D tax credits. So that's another little advantage if it fits the definition. 2 or 3 little, sorry, I'm probably going to go just a moment over, but just to give you some examples, culture change in a small company. So this is a little computing company. They are already quite a good sort of people-based business, but they are absolutely committed to building their culture so that every individual can grow and stay with the company. So it's retention as much as anything. This has only just started, so I've just put here on this slide, sorry, I realised I can't point to it to the guys online. On the right-hand side is the public description of the project, which is really the only information I can give you at the moment. But you know, you can see that what they're wanting to do is decentralising decision-making, enabling, empowering all of their organisations to do that. They're pretty innovative already, quite an agile business already. So they're drawing on academics from the business school at University of Lincoln to do this. By contrast, Fujitsu, huge ICT supply company supplying most of the government departments, etc., have the same issue. You know, they've already changed the way they do things, and much of their workforce operates remotely. But there's lots of teams that need to be talking better to each other, to be able to learn from each other, and they want to go through a huge change in how they set their teams up and how they engage with each other. Again, looking at individuals, are individuals in the right roles? How do they communicate? And so at the moment, they're still doing the analysis part of that, but that's going to be a huge change. Once they learn how to do it, they're going to be able to offer that as a consultancy service to their clients as well. So there's a two-way benefit there. One of the examples I think that Jacqueline had but didn't name is a straightforward commercial marketing company. They recognized that they needed to look at behavioral psychology to build into the way they design their campaigns. They do advertising campaigns. You know, I've put the Beaver Fruit Farms, it's down the road from me, so I have a sense of ownership of that one. But they've been working with all sorts of very large organisations, commercial organisations. But they also do the kinds of campaigns that NHS trusts might ask for. So they did one on sexual health recently, and so it's a very, very different market. So they need to get the language right and the way they communicate. And they've embedded that. People are starting to use it, and they're starting to advertise it before the project's finished as part of the service they have to offer. This is a typical sort of charity situation, Derbyshire Wildlife Trust. They have a commercial arm, but up to now it's kind of run a few cafes and done a few sort of, you know, souvenir products. They want to be serious about changing their whole approach so that they know how to spot commercial opportunities. And the Environment Act last year, with biodiversity net gains coming in, is an opportunity for them to provide really good advice to developers, land developers, on how to rewild the land that they impact on. They see that as a potential commercial opportunity, but they've got to learn how to do it. They've never done this kind of stuff before. That's just a whole sort of change in their business models, but also their culture and the skills of their people. I just picked this one because I thought it was a really interesting one. It's a straightforward joinery company. They do energy efficient timber frame kit homes and things. But what they want to do here is really focus on community-led and user-centered design. So they've got to really dig into understanding what that means and how they can build that back into their design philosophy, and then how they can use that in their marketing. So that's going to be another very practical outcome that's going to have huge benefits to the people that live in the homes that they design. And finally, again, the heritage one that Jacqueline referred to, this was the socioeconomic analysis, Chatsworth House. We did this during COVID, so there were no visitors. But what they wanted to do was understand their visitor economy and how that whole estate, in all the things it does, impacts on the local community, employment and all the rest of it. They've come up with a methodology for that, and they're going to publish that. So they're going to make that available to other heritage organisations, visitor organisations, but you know, it will help them to make their own strategic decisions a lot better as well. So that's been a really interesting one. I met the associate for the first time after the project had finished at an event that Jacqueline and I were at. So I will leave it at that. My contact details are there. You are going to see these slides. Please, if you have any interest in following up on this, I'm happy to help, but Kate will help to make connections into local universities rather than through me. Thank you very much. Okay.
Right, so thank you very much, Philippa. That's absolutely fantastic. So if you can just bear with us while we get Dan on board. Dan, if you are there, if you can.
I am indeed.
There.
It's nice
right, now we need
all.
to make sure that we can share the sound. So I'm just going to move that away.
Hi, Dan, are you able to say something?
Hello. Are we without audio?
It's working.
Right, yes. No, we can hear you on the laptop. We just want to make sure that we can hear you, the people in the room as well. So why don't we start, because I'm conscious of time, and we'll fiddle in the background.
Right. Okay, that's great. So thanks for inviting me to speak this morning. I guess my purpose in this session is really to provoke ideas and get people thinking a bit about potential projects, potential areas for research and partnerships with business. The focus of what I'm going to speak about now is in terms of thinking about how we embrace flexibility and a lot of the change that was enforced in the last few years, and how we can take that forward in a positive direction as a way of enhancing our organisations. So are you moving it forward for me, Kate? Or can I move it forward?
We'll move it forward for you, Dan.
Right, excellent. So if you can just shift me forward a little bit, that'd be great. Thanks. Right, so I'm just going to very briefly provide some context in terms of the last couple of years, the key changes that have happened in the flexibility sphere, that are relevant to this discussion this morning. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what we mean by workplace flexibility and how workplace flexibility impacts our working lives and our organisations, and how big an impact it can have, as a way, as I really emphasise, in the importance of getting this right. I'll then talk a little bit about the benefits of flexibility and what we already know, I guess, in terms of a really quite extensive existing understanding built from around 20 to 30, probably more so 30 years of research that's been conducted in this area in various iterations. And obviously, as technologies have changed and the nature of flexibility has changed, that research has developed alongside that. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about getting the most out of flexibility in the current understanding. So building on some emerging findings from a project we've done with multinational organisations, UK business, speaking a little bit about the findings we've made from that research. So if we can just shift me on again, that would be great. Thank you. And again. Right, so the recent context then. So, of course, the impact of the pandemic was significant. We had around 2 in 5 people working at home at peak. And we continue to see that people are spending quite a bit of their time at home. So while there might not be this significant portion of people spending 100% of their work time at home, which wasn't a flexible working arrangement, of course, that was enforced by public health requirements. And what we have seen is a continuation of workers spending some of their time at home. So around kind of 2/5 again of workers continue to report spending some of their work time at home, whether that's 1 day a week, whether that's 4 days a week. That varies considerably depending on the nature of the work they're doing and the role. What we've also seen is a significant increase in the use of hybrid working routines, and also an acknowledgement of these working routines as being hybrid. So something that would have historically been a casual kind of agreement between a boss and an employee that they could work at home on a Wednesday afternoon or something of that nature, is actually now been coined and properly recognised as being a hybrid working routine, where you're spending some of your time working at an employer premise and some time working elsewhere. Now, that might be at the home, it might be at client sites, it might be at other locations, or it might indeed be a mix of locations. And what we're finding is that getting on for half of workers are now reporting some form of hybrid working routine. If we can move me forward, that would be great. It's also useful in terms of context to think about what's happening in the flexibility sphere in terms of formal flexible working arrangements. So formal flexible working arrangements have been quite widespread now for almost 2 decades, following policy by the UK government implemented in the early 2000s. As times moved on, the availability of flexible working arrangements, formalised kind of HR agreed flexible working arrangements has increased significantly. But those flexible working arrangements have often been quite narrow in their take up. So what we've seen a lot of is people using flexi time, so having a level of flexibility over their starting and finishing time in their working day. We've also continued to see a lot of reduced working hour arrangements being used, whether that's proper part-time working. I say proper, what is proper, but whether that's part-time working arrangements as it would traditionally be understood in terms of people working a kind of half week, or whether that's people working some other type of reduced hours arrangement, maybe only 4 days a week, maybe 3 days a week, whatever that might look like. And of course, we've seen this significant increase in working from home in the last 2 years, but to contextualize that fully, we have to acknowledge that quite a lot of people did used to work at home at least some time, even prior to the pandemic. The significant differences in the last 2 years were firstly the period when people were working at home 100% of the time, which was very unusual for most workers. And secondly, the follow-up period we've had more recently, which is where there's been this more widespread understanding and acknowledgement of what we mean by hybrid working and working in multiple locations. We also need to emphasize, when we're thinking about formal flexible working arrangements, the value of informal flexibility. So as well as agreed formal arrangements that end up on a contractual basis with an employee, it's also important to recognize that the value both to an employee and the relationship they have with their organization of having a level of informal flexibility that very much links to levels of autonomy and control over their work as well, things that employees very much value as well in work. And around 2/3 of workers report having some level of informal flexibility currently. If we can move me forward, yeah. It's very unnerving not being able to move yourself forward. And again, please. So I'm going to speak a little bit now about what we mean by workplace flexibility in a broader sense and the relative importance of it. So if we can just move me forward once more. Okay. And again, I think the text will come in. Yeah, there we are. Right. So I think just to really emphasize the importance of flexibility in the work sphere is to identify that flexibility is a dimension of workplace well-being. And by workplace well-being, we mean that holistic kind of understanding of how work affects the quality of our lives, not just our personal lives, but our working lives themselves. And thinking about that in terms of the importance of getting that picture right for employees within an organization, so that the organization and its employees can benefit mutually from that relationship. Flexibility is one of the 6 core dimensions of workplace wellbeing that I developed in a recent model that I've had published in a book, Wellbeing and the Quality of Working Lives, this year. And flexibility itself has multiple sub-dimensions, and that includes things like formal flexible working arrangements and informal flexible working arrangements, flexibility over location of work, but it also includes other aspects of flexibility like the importance of breaks and work recovery, the role of work-life balance, so that kind of balance between our paid work and our personal lives, and it goes on, and we can think about also the kind of physical workspace in part of that as well, and some links it has with other areas. If we can move us on again. So what are the benefits we're currently aware of in terms of flexibility? Well, existing understanding tells us that the benefits are numerous. So it really emphasizes the importance of flexibility as a facilitator of positive organizational outcomes. So at the worker end, it provides increased control and autonomy, and of course, higher levels of flexibility. That's by its nature an important part of what flexible working and what flexibility in work gives. It offers the potential of better work-life balance, the ability to manage work and the rest of our lives, and the way that allows an individual to optimize their time spent working. That in turn is likely to result in greater levels of job satisfaction, and there's quite a body of research that shows that. And of course, a happy worker is usually a more productive worker. In terms of kind of more overlapped worker and organizational benefits, we already touched upon the idea of increased productivity and job performance, very much linked to that ability to better manage work and life, the fact that workers are happier in their jobs, and the fact that they are able to enact a level of control and autonomy and have higher levels of agency in performing their role. It also has the potential to make work more accessible and inclusive by providing opportunities to people who wouldn't necessarily have opportunities to work in less flexible ways, whether that's an individual who has caring responsibilities, someone with some form of disability, or other needs indeed. So it potentially allows you to access a talent pool that wouldn't otherwise be accessible. And that's a really important thing to think about when we're thinking about the benefits for an organization. At the more organisation end, it also provides some other benefits in terms of the potential for reduced accommodation costs when we start thinking about things like the use of hybrid working, meaning that you don't need such large premises, lower levels of absenteeism, and indeed lower levels of employees leaving the organisation, so extending from absenteeism. And also improve customer services. If workers are happier in their job and better able to perform in their job, that should have a knock-on effect, a follow-up effect on customers. If you move me on then, yeah, that'd be great. Okay, so lastly, I just wanted to bring us in to think about how we get the most out of flexibility, drawing on some evidence from some research I've recently conducted with a large multinational organisation. So if we can move forward once more. Yeah. So this research comprised working with the organisation quite closely over a period of about 6 months. This wasn't a KTP project, just for reference, but I guess it very much had some of the features of one. We had an intern at the organisation who was basically assigned to the project on our end. We had funding from the organisation for a research assistant who was brought in to work on the project for 6 months. So it had a number of similar features, albeit it was a smaller scale in terms of time and cost project. And what we did is we worked with the organisation for 6 months. We went to the organisation, not physically because of the timing of the project in late 2021, unfortunately. We went to the organisation and we engaged with their workforce through a series of focus groups. We ran 12 focus groups, best part of 60 employees we spoke to, and a total amount of time spent with those employees of probably getting on for 15 hours cumulatively of talking to individuals in the organisation. And what we were wanting to look at is how the changes in terms of flexibility had impacted the workforce and what flexibility could look like moving forward. And just to summarize very briefly, in the interest of time, some of the key findings from this project, one of the main things we identified is that to be successful, flexibility has to work both ways. There needs to be a very clear understanding on both the part of the employer and the employee what flexibility looks like in the context of their role, what is feasible and what isn't feasible, as a way of managing expectations, but also as a way of ensuring that you get the most out of flexibility. We also found, and it's a second use of the term ripple effect today, which is interesting, isn't it? But in a very different context. We also found a really novel component of this research, which was that we identified that the use of flexible working and routines at the individual level has a potential ripple effect that can be felt much wider and can be actually quite far reaching, not just at the team level, but through right potentially to the level of the organisation and even customers. So what I mean by that is that decisions over an individual's work routines, whether that's what days they're going to be in the office, if they're engaging in a hybrid routine, what hours they're going to be working, if they're engaging in some kind of flexi time, as another example. That decision potentially has quite a significant knock-on effect, a ripple effect for members of their team, and indeed for members of teams in other functions, because it affects their availability. It affects the ability to contact them, to work with them, and to get work from them. So in terms of things like deliverables. And so that can then have a further ripple effect, not just at team levels, but outside that at the functional level, and then outside of that to the organisation level. And so what we identified is that to respond to that effectively, we have to think very carefully about how we use flexibility and what the roles of some key stakeholders are in the organisation to make sure we get the most out of it. So if we can move forward again. Might have to press a couple of times to bring in text. Excellent, thank you. So there's a few components to this that I think are really important to highlight here. So the first one is around awareness and acceptance. So one of the things we found associated with this impact of flexibility, and importantly as well in terms of the kind of flexibility working both ways, is that there is sometimes quite a lack of awareness, and certainly in larger organizations, there can be pockets of very different levels of understanding of what flexible working arrangements are available and how they can be used. And that's not just at an employee level, it also affects line management. And of course, then that affects very much feelings around fairness and equity and things like that among employees, where they might see flexibility being used very differently in different parts of the business. Now, some of that, of course, might be down to function, it might be down to the nature of work. And in those cases, that has to be going back to the idea of managing people's expectations, part of the relationship between an employee and the organization, in terms of making sure that understanding is clear. But we also found evidence that there was very much pockets of different levels of understanding, even where flexibility in principle could be the same. And so that's problematic. So it's really important that awareness is paid attention to. And that also has a follow-up in terms of acceptance. When we think about how decisions are made over what flexibility can be offered, and again, the influence of local line management, the influence of different ways of working and different ways of leading can have considerable influence over what flexibility looks like for different employees. And again, where that isn't a product of the nature of work or business need, but is instead a product of line management preferences or lack of awareness or something of that nature, that becomes problematic. And then that brings us on to the next component, which is about relationship management. So when we have a workforce that's working flexibly, it's really important to think about how we manage relationships. Firstly, in terms of things we've just mentioned about what may be perceived as differential treatment, but also when we start thinking about the fact that the kind of importance of and key role of coordination in all of this. So in order to make this work, we have to coordinate flexibility really effectively. And actually, it brings a really important role for line management, because line managers are faced with a situation where they may have different employees in on different days, physically in a workplace. They might have different employees available at different times of day, depending on the flexible arrangements that have been agreed. And that means that there's an important coordination role in terms of making sure that their teams can function and that there's availability, not just within their team, but also outside of their team. So how can their members of their team be contacted? How can their team work with other teams, work with other stakeholders in the organization? If we can move forward one last time. Okay, and so then to get all this to work together, we've argued requires what we've termed an inclusive approach to flexibility, one that's centered on being inclusive, but also on thinking about the role of employee autonomy and agency in this process, moving away from one-size-fits-all strategies towards strategies that are more flexible and have a focus on tailoring to individual needs, while acknowledging the role of business need and the impact on other stakeholders within the organization. And so that's that importance of getting that approach, that balance, to make sure that the individual needs are met while avoiding some of those ripple effects that we identified can occur with flexibility. And then the final and quite big picture component of this that affects organizations at a strategic level most definitely is the need for culture change. So attached to a lot of the things I've just been talking about in terms of getting the most out of flexibility is a need to change the culture of the organization, to move toward a new way of looking at work and how we construct jobs and how we design jobs and how we also realize jobs. It's not just about the design and putting someone in a role. It's also about how we do it on the ground when we get into that position, how line managers interact with employees, how employees interact with each other, and how all of those parties may interact with clients and customers. And that's a big picture strategic change and can be quite a difficult thing to get right and to enact, especially where you have different perspectives within the organization and different viewpoints in terms of whether they think flexibility has value. The importance, of course, is to emphasize that the evidence base very strongly tells us that flexibility does have a significant value. So I will leave it there. In the interest of time and the fact that we've run over, I know, for the webinar part. If we just bring up the last slide, I'll just do my little bit of marketing. If you have any interest in pursuing anything in this area, if it would be of interest or help to you as an organisation to work with the university, exploring some of these themes and thinking about how we can support a journey toward greater flexibility in your organisation, there's my contact details. Thank you.
That's fab. Thank you so much, Dan. And there's a little ripple in the room as well. So thank you very much for that. So we're just going to stop sharing that in a minute. So yes, that's it for today's event. Thank you very much to everybody who's joined online. Thanks to everybody in the room. We're in the room. We're going to carry on a little bit more now for a little bit of a workshop, but those who've joined us online, we'll close it there. We will share the slides after this event, and we will also share the recording. So just to leave you really with a kind of a few call to actions. Think about the challenges in the organisation. Think about the opportunities for change within the organisation. Think about all the benefits that can possibly occur through looking holistically at the overall opportunities within the business. And just think about some of the keywords that we've talked about today around how social sciences, social economics, all those other kind of long lists of words that Jacqueline pulled up can actually be helpful to the business and to the organisation. And get in touch. Business Club runs every kind of couple of months. We have an event every couple of months. So you can follow us on LinkedIn and you can follow us on Twitter. Yeah, look forward to seeing you at the next event, which will probably be around September time, and we'll publish that shortly. So thanks very much for attending today.